Welcome to the Flex Rental Solutions webinar. Today, as part of our Back to Basics series, we're going to be looking at the warehouse process. So this will be a more basic look at the warehouse process. We're just going to look at the process of going from quote to pull sheet, some of the principles behind a pull sheet, prepping a job, and then returning a job. We're not going to get too advanced in this webinar where we're going to be talking about things like packages and containers. We'll briefly touch on that, but that will be probably next week's webinar where we start talking about that and how packages and containers are prepped and returned and built and things like that. So today is really just going to be more of a basic overview of the warehouse process, but we will look at a lot of different settings, tips and tricks and things like that that might help you as you go through the process. So I've already got a quote built. This is something I just called warehouse training. It's supposed to ship at 12 p.m. That's correct. Yeah, 12 p.m. It's 10 a.m. where I am, so I have 2 hours before this needs to ship, so that should work out perfect. Fairly basic quote. I just have a little bit of video, a little bit of audio, and some power. And I haven't done anything yet with the workflow. So the first thing I want to do is in Flex's basic workflow, at least the workflow that exists when we send somebody a new version of Flex, is that your quotes will start in the inquiry state. And in order to create a pull sheet, you have to be in the confirmed state. So that's the first thing I want to do with my quote is confirm it. And I also could have set it to tentative first and then confirmed it. It's really just how your company works, but just for the sake of time, I wanted to confirm that quote so that now when I'm in the confirmed state, in the confirmed status, I have different workflow options, including the ability to create, update, pull sheet. Now let's talk about a couple principles that just happened as I confirmed that quote. Number one, when I was in the inquiry state, at least in my system, and I would say in most of our customer systems, they haven't made any adjustments to this, but when you're in the inquiry state, all of the inventory that appears on the quote is not being booked yet, meaning it's not being taken out of availability for this job between these dates. But the second I go and confirm the quote, now all of this inventory is being considered in availability calculations between these dates because this quote is confirmed. As an example, let's look at this Samsung 55-inch TV. If we go to the schedule for that item, we should see now that it looks like I probably have 1 out of commission or that's just been out indefinitely on a job. So I have 9 out of 10 available except for the dates of this quote. It dips down by 2 because I'm requesting 2 on that job. And I can double click to see that as well. So that's what's happening when you hit confirm, is everything on this quote is now being considered in availability calculations. It's now being booked between the ship and return date. The reason I bring that up is because now that we go, when we go and create a pull sheet, something really important happens here. So I just click create update pull sheet. You saw that email notification. I'm not having it send to anybody right now. But you can have that send to the account manager of the job or to your warehouse manager. If you want to make changes to that, just go to your projects menu, click workflow jobs, and you just need to make some changes to the email notification. That's called the pull sheet created email notification. So if you just double click on that, you could add who it gets sent to, just comma, and say I want to also send this to Chris at your company, whoever's emails you want that to send to every time. And then don't forget to click update, of course. And that same email notification will send out if you come back to your quote and make changes and click create update pull sheet. And that would send to the same people, just knowing that they would know that the pull sheet has now been updated. Now let's talk about a few things that happen when you do update a pull sheet from a quote. I know a lot of our customers, once a pull sheet has been created, they give their warehouse a little bit of flexibility in terms of being able to come in and make changes to quantities. maybe even adding things to the pull sheet, because a lot of times you might just be quoting the main parts and pieces, but the stuff that actually has to get sent might be a little bit different. Maybe the warehouse notices that you didn't put enough XLR cable or power cable, or maybe you didn't put any of that at all. Or maybe they notice that you didn't put any speaker stands. I don't have any of those in my inventory right now, but they could come and actually add and change quantities here on the pull sheet. Let's just add a random item, maybe this QSC 12, just so we can see what happens when we have an added item to the quote that's not on the pull sheet. So if I go back to the quote, and let's say that whoever's building the quote also added something. Maybe they came in here and said, I actually need a little bit of HDMI, which again, I don't have in my system. So let's go with VGA. I only have 10 and 25 foot. Let's say that I want a few 100-foot runs of VGA as well. So the first principle here that I want to show you is that, number one, if you start making changes on the quote, look at what happens over here with the availability boxes. When we created that pull sheet, the pull sheet starts taking availability. The pull sheet is now what is calculating availability in the system, because we have two separate elements now, a quote and a pull sheet, both of which have the same line items with the same quantities. So we don't want there to be a double conflict. We don't want Flex to look at the quote and calculate availability and also look at the pull sheet and calculate availability. So we only want one of those elements to calculate availability, and at this point it's the pull sheet. But the way that works is that the quote needs to see a matching line item downstream, which is the pull sheet. So the quote has VGA 10 foot and 25 foot at a quantity of 1. So does the pull sheet. So the quote knows that that's on the pull sheet. That's why these yellow locks appear. That just means that availability for this is controlled by a downstream document, which is the pull sheet. But when I put this new item on a quote, this doesn't appear downstream on the pull sheet. So that's why it doesn't show the lock, because the quote doesn't have a downstream line item to look at on the pull sheet. So right now the availability for this is being controlled by the quote until I go update the pull sheet and get this item on the pull sheet. But look what happens to the pull sheet when we go and create update. It can send out that email notification again. I just click OK and it updates the pull sheet. You'll notice a few things happen. Number one, the items that were added to the quote do get pushed and added to the pull sheet, and that's good. Any item that was added to the pull sheet and not to the quote will remain. Remember, I added this QSC. It never appeared on the quote, but I just put it directly on the pull sheet. So that item will remain. But the one drawback is that any quantity changes that you made to the pull sheet, if you didn't make those quantity changes to the quote, then when you go and create update pull sheet, the pull sheet's going to take on the current quantities that show on the quote. So even though I changed all these to 8 on the pull sheet, when I updated the quote, or when I updated the pull sheet from the quote, then what happened was the pull sheet looked at the quote and said, oh, I need to take those quantities. So that is the one drawback to if this is kind of your workflow and the way that you do things. If you make changes to the pull sheet quantities and those items still exist on a quote, then the quote, when you push update, create update pull sheet, the quote's quantities will take over on the pull sheet. I've worked with a few companies on this, and they just have some internal workflows that they use to prevent this. So the second you create a pull sheet, all changes are made to the pull sheet. Or the second you create a pull sheet, you have a certain time when the warehouse can come in and actually make changes to it. So maybe the warehouse doesn't make changes to a pull sheet until the day before it gets prepped. So then that way you can be pretty confident that all changes have been made to the quote and updated to the pull sheet. Because the idea is you just don't want to lose any of the quantity changes that you've done when the account manager updates the quote, or updates the pull sheet from the quote, I should say. So just keep that in mind. Let's just focus on the pull sheet now. If we've already talked about what happens with the quote, availability is now being 100% controlled by the pull sheet. You can see all the locks on the availability numbers here. That just means that these line items all appear on the pull sheet and that the pull sheet is downstream of the quote. Let's look at the pull sheet now and some of the things that we can do on a pull sheet. We already looked at how you can add items. You just drag and drop to add items to a pull sheet, and that doesn't automatically add it to the quote. You can also add virtual groups to your pull sheet too. Just like these groups that were the subtotals in the quote, I could come over here and say add a virtual group, and that adds it to the bottom, and just say adds or additional items, whatever it might be. And then from there, I would just start drag and dropping items into that additional group. I'm trying to think of somewhere where I actually have inventory, maybe some more power. But then again, it just depends on, number one, I'd have to go into insert sort mode. But it just depends on how you want your pull sheet to look. If you want to be able to keep track of quantities that you added so that maybe you can go back and add those to a quote later on so that you could charge your customer for them. But if it's things like cable and whatnot, you might just be adding those and just kind of absorb that cost, and you're not necessarily going to turn around and charge that to your customers. But that's how you can add a new group just to the pull sheet. You can also do a lot of things like you can on a quote, copy and paste lines, delete lines. Sorting the line items might be useful for some people, where you could sort line items alphabetically, ascending or descending, or by hierarchy, meaning the groups that they belong to. I personally just like keeping the pull sheet in the order that it came from the quote, but you could try that sort if you want. Of course, you could delete the whole pull sheet. Creating a partial pull sheet is not really recommended. This was an old feature that a customer requested. If you create a partial pull sheet, it creates an entirely new pull sheet, and you lose those links between the quote and the pull sheet. So it starts kind of throwing your system into a availability and conflict nightmare. So I don't recommend using this unless it's for the express purpose of why it was created, and maybe we'll go over that in another webinar, but I'm pretty sure there's only a couple companies that actually use that for the original purpose. And then down here you can run a variety of reports for your pull sheet as well. I probably have more enabled than you see in your system. You can always just go to Projects, Menu, Project Elements, double-click Pull Sheet, and this is all the settings for your pull sheet. And this includes which reports are available to you. So when this loads, I'll click on the Reports tab, and anything in the instance level reports that has a check next to it, that will be available to me from my pull sheet. So you can see all these ones that I have checked. If I want to enable another one, I would just check it, click Update, and then go back to my pull sheet and reload it, and then I would see that report available to me. So you see an option here in the workflow. The standard way that you will go through a pull sheet workflow is not by clicking workflow actions. We have some deep system settings we're not even going to look at, but I'll just explain to you. We have some system settings that will change the status of your pull sheet and your manifest that's based on when you're done prepping it and when you're done returning. So right now the pull sheet is in the awaiting prep status. If I go to my prep screen, and if you don't see where I am, right down here in the bottom, go to prep screen. I'll click go to prep screen. And this is where I can start actually scanning barcodes and showing quantities checked off and whatnot. But once I'm done doing that and I click finalize, it's that action of clicking finalize that will change the status of my pull sheet. Same with the manifest when I'm returning it. Once I click finalize and I'm done returning it, that's what changes the status. So yeah, a lot of times you're not going to be coming over to your pull sheet and clicking a workflow action like you would on a quote. Those status changes happen when you're done and you click finalize with your prep. So let's get acquainted with the prep screen for a pull sheet. and then we'll scan a few items out, and we'll show a few things, a few tips and tricks with that as well. So of course, this is the list that shows everything that was on the pull sheet. I can also look at my scan history for everything that I've scanned so far, which obviously is nothing. I have the option to show or hide completed items. So once I start scanning items, they would disappear from the list over here as soon as their quantity is fulfilled. And then I have a few other options over here that weren't on the original pull sheet that I do get in the prep screen. One of them is prompt preferences. So as you're scanning, there might be different prompts that appear. Something might be like a virtual scan confirmation. If I just double click an item, I can virtually scan it. And Flex would say, are you sure you want to virtually scan this item? I turn that one off because I do that all the time in my trainings. But if you have barcode scanners and actual barcodes on your inventory, we always recommend using those instead of virtually scanning items. So you might want to turn that prompt on just to bug people when they do virtually scan. It would tell them, hey, you're virtually scanning. Are you sure you want to do this? Orphan scan prompt is going to be if you scan something that's not on the list, that would give you a prompt, and we'll look at that. So there's a bunch of different prompts, and you'll see those pop up, and as you do it, so for example, as I virtually scan, let's say my TV, so I double click that. Instead of scanning a barcode, all I'm doing is just checking which barcodes I want to scan. We don't usually recommend doing this because obviously if you have barcodes on each unit, then you'll want to scan those barcodes to ensure you're scanning the right one. But I do this often when I'm training just because it's a little bit faster. So again, not really recommended to virtually scan serialized items like this, but I'm just going to do it so you can see what the prompt looks like. And I guess I didn't click update on that because it will usually pop up a full screen box with the prompt. This one is just saying we bypass the prompt, and that's the prompt that we bypassed. Let me show you an example of a prompt though that will actually pop up. So if I just type in a random barcode, which hopefully that's in my system. This is a barcode projector. This is the Orphan scan prompt. It's saying, hey, if you take this item, it will create a shortage. So maybe I don't want to take that one. Let's try another item. It looks like almost anything that I'm trying to scan out will create a shortage at this point in my system. I could probably find something that won't create a shortage. Well, that one was an actual item that's on my pull sheet. But I'm looking for an example of if I scan something that won't create a shortage, it will just say this item's just not on the list. But most of these things, it looks like I already have on another quote or is scanned out or something like that. So it's telling me that, or I just don't have any quantity on hand. So it's just telling me if I try to scan that item, it will create a shortage. But that's what the prompt looks like. It actually pops up a box and it makes you click a cancel or accept. While we're in this area, let me just show you a couple of quick permissions. If you're a system administrator and can administer permissions to people, let's look at permissions really quick. And there are two permissions that control a couple of these things that I was just doing. Number one, can somebody manage their own warehouse prompts, yes or no? You could deny that to somebody so that they can never change which prompts pop up and which ones don't. Also, can virtually scan serialized items. We always like to have virtual scanning available for non-serialized items because it makes it a lot easier to just double click and enter a quantity. But for serialized items that have their own individual barcodes on each unit, you might not want to allow people to virtually scan those like you saw how I just did, because that can get dangerous. People can get lazy and double click a line item and then just virtually scan all the barcodes. That's not recommended. We want you to scan the actual barcodes on the units. So maybe you would deny that to somebody if you don't want them to be able to virtually scan serialized items. I'm going to keep that granted for me though, because I want to be able to do that. And then we also have another can force shortage during the scan process. That would be related to the prompt that we saw just a minute ago where I tried to scan something out that wasn't on my list, but was telling me if you scan this out, it will create a shortage for another job. Notice that when I tried to do that, if we go back to my prep screen, see, it's telling me it will create a shortage, but it also lets me scan it out. I could click accept. But if that permission were denied to somebody, it would show that prompt, and accept would be grayed out. They wouldn't even be able to do it. So they might have to go to somebody that has that permission so that they can actually scan it out. So those are just a few permissions that are related to scanning that you might want to be aware of. But let's go back to our prep and actually start scanning more of this job. So like I said, with virtual scanning, that might be something that you do all the time with non-serialized items. Because for non-serialized items, you could either print out the generic model barcode and then just have like a folder that has all your non-serialized barcodes and scan that with a barcode scanner. But a lot of times I just like to come right up to the line item, double click, and that gives me the quantity prompt right away. So in this case, virtually scanning is really not dangerous because it's really just doing the exact same thing that would be done if I scanned this barcode by hand. So I don't tell people that it's not recommended to virtually scan non-serialized items because honestly I do recommend it. It's much faster and easier to be able to do that. But like I said, when it comes to serialized items, you might want to deny that permission to somebody, because when I double click to virtually scan a serialized item, I could just lazily choose which two I'm prepping. They both get scanned, but there's a very real possibility that whichever ones I just virtually prepped wouldn't be the same ones that get sent out the door. So that's why I say we always recommend if you have serialized items, put barcodes on those items and definitely use a barcode scanner to scan those things out instead of virtually scanning. But non-serialized items, again, virtually scanning works like a charm. So I don't actually have a barcode scanner set up. So what I'm going to do is instead of virtually scanning some of my other serialized items, I'm just going to go into each of my serialized items and look at some barcodes that I can scan. Because the way that Flex works is when you have a barcode scanner, the barcode scanner is programmed to recognize that you just did a barcode scan. Flex will put the cursor up into the barcode field automatically and then enter that barcode for you. So what I'm going to show you is just the shorter way of, or the longer way of doing that, I should say. So when I scan something with a barcode, like I said, Flex automatically goes up into this cursor field, so you don't have to put your cursor up there every time that you're about to scan something. Then it's going to enter the barcode, and it's going to hit enter automatically for you. So I'm just doing this by hand, but when you do it with a barcode scanner, essentially the same exact thing is happening. And again, like I said, you don't have to go back and click into this field every time if you're using a barcode scanner. Flex is pre-programmed, or the barcode scanner should be pre-programmed to know to go up into this field every time. So I could have clicked and been somewhere else, but the second that I scan something, Flex will know to go back up into here. Let's prep some of my other non-serialized items. And I'm intentionally going to prep fewer than I need there. And again, even though I said I don't really recommend it, I am going to virtually scan some of these serialized items just because we only have about 5 minutes left in the webinar and I don't want to have to go back and look for barcodes and hand scan those in. But again, this is not really recommended for your normal process. And again, I'm leaving some of these unprepped intentionally just because I want to show you what that looks like. And then let's just go ahead and virtually scan. This time I'm going to use the checkbox and go and say scan selected items out. And Flex will just automatically prep all of those items. That's another permission. You can deny somebody from doing this in their permission structure. But I have that permission, so I'm able to do it. It gets a little annoying, but it also moves a little bit faster for you. So let's say that I've prepped everything that I actually have, and now I want to finalize. It's fine that I can finalize even if I don't have everything prepped. Flex will still let me finalize. Let's also say that maybe I accidentally prepped, or maybe I prepped some things and the account manager came down and said, take those 65-inch TVs off. We just got rid of those. I can come and say undo my last scan, but those TVs weren't my last scan, so that's not going to help me much. So what I want to do is click this cogwheel, then click related scan records, and find the barcodes that I prepped and say undo yes. Click accept, and it's going to ask, are you sure? I'll say yes, and that will undo those. So I could do that on any line item. Just click that cogwheel and go to the related scan records. Let's also say that they came down and said we actually need to substitute these for 85 inchers. So I could come and click that cogwheel and say substitute line, and now Flex is telling me the next thing you scan is going to substitute for this line. So I could scan an 85 incher. The 85 incher will show on the manifest that gets created, but this line item will get checked off. That might just be for when you're doing last minute changes. You don't want to necessarily have to go back to the quote, make the change, then update the pull sheet. You could just do a substitution really quick like that. If you accidentally click that substitute, you could always just press escape, and that will clear this, and you're out of substitution mode. We also have a few other options, like you could choose from another list. We'll probably look at this a little bit more in another webinar, but I could find an older job or maybe something that's currently scanned out. And I could find that manifest and scan items from that manifest directly to this next job. So that's really useful if you have a job that never really comes back to the warehouse, but you want to be able to scan from one job to another. Let's say that we're done with this prep though, so I want to go and finalize. Remember what happens when I click finalize. Number one, it's just going to show me that I'm complete. When it was finalized, if I go back to my pull sheet and refresh, the status changes. It's now in manifest created status. And it's also going to show things that I didn't scan on the pull sheet as being controlled by the pull sheet now for availability. Because the same thing happens with the relationship between a quote and a pull sheet. When I created a pull sheet, it locked the availability on the quote because it was controlled by the pull sheet. Now that I've finalized and all these items appear on a manifest, that manifest is the most downstream element, so the pull sheet doesn't control availability anymore for anything that's on the manifest. Let's open that manifest and just look and see what it looks like. It doesn't really have a hierarchy in groups like it did on a pull sheet because this is really just a list of items that got scanned out to this job. And it looks like it shows the items as they were scanned in order. So it's this manifest now and that scan out record that's controlling availability of inventory. So all these items that are on a pull sheet, this doesn't control availability anymore. If I look at schedules for these items, it's not going to be based on the pull sheet dates. It's going to be based on the manifest and the fact that I scan those items out. You could always go back and unfinalize a pull sheet if you need to add some things to it and then just refinalize, and everything will get added to the manifest, no problem. We do have a couple useful reports too. If you don't have these enabled, remember how we enabled those earlier in the webinar. If you need to reference, I'll put this on our YouTube page and you can see how we did that. But we have a couple of process, but a couple that are good for once you're done prepping, you can click the unprepped equipment list, and that would give you a PDF of everything that did not get prepped. So it would show that one quantity of speaker, these two quantity of XLR, these two TVs. As you're prepping, we also have like the equipment list with bin locations. If you put bin locations into your inventory, like we looked at last week, then the equipment list would show each line item with their bin location. So just go through and check out some of these reports that are available to you and see if any of them work out for you. We went a little over time, so let's do return manifest type stuff for next week's webinar. Just so we don't have to go another 10 or 15 minutes on this one. We've already gone 30 minutes. But just as a lead up to that, like I said, when you scan things out from this prep screen, everything you scan gets put on this manifest. And then you can print this manifest, and we have a bunch of different reports for manifests. And then at some point you will go to return the items from that manifest. So that's just kind of a sneak preview of where we'll be going next week, but just for time's sake, let's save that. So if you do have any questions about prepping a job or any of the pull sheet functionality, if you're looking for tips and tricks, we always recommend going to forum.flexrentalsolutions.com. That's where you can get answers from other Flex users and even from some of us at Flex Support. If you're having any technical issues that you need some help with, then you can email support@flexrentalsolutions.com.